Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. It's the Rustic Wednesday but on Saturday collab, hosted by my good friends, Dawn Shelly Meets Bling and Shelly of Repurposed My Way. This month's theme is all things fall. You're going to find links to Dawn and Shelly's channels, as well as a link to the playlist in the description box. I have a couple of really cute Halloween projects for you. Let's get into it. I have here one of those disposable cookie containers, the kind you get from the bakery. The lid's around here too somewhere. Anyway, we're going to transform this into a really cute trick-or-treat bucket. So to do that, we're going to need some tissue paper cut into strips. I had these left over from a project from last year. We're also going to be using some vintage Halloween images. I printed these on regular printer paper, and I just found them on Pinterest. I also sprayed them with clear matte sealer because I have an inkjet printer and the sealer will prevent the Mod Podge from smearing the ink. So we're going to need some Mod Podge too. That'll get us started. Right, so all we're going to do is apply a coat of Mod Podge to the container, just wide enough for the tissue paper strips. And I'm also going to add a little bit of Mod Podge on the inside of the bucket, right where the lip is. I'm going to add my first strip of paper, folding that paper over the lip so that it catches the Mod Podge on the inside of the bucket. I'm not really going to worry about wrinkles. This will add texture, which to me is always good. You feel me? It did go on pretty smoothly though. Once I get each strip of paper into place, I'll add a top coat of Mod Podge as I go along. I'm going to slightly overlap each strip all the way around the container. Pretty easy and straightforward, am I right? After the first layer of tissue paper dries, I add a second one to cover any bare spots. I did the bottom and the lid too. So now while that's drying, I'll cut out the wee images and I'm going to leave a little bit of a white border around each of them. I'm going to tear the trick-or-treat text instead of cutting it because I want to get that deckled edge, the torn, raggedy looking edge. I'm going to grunge out my images, first with Tim Holtz Vintage Photograph Distressing ink, then with a little black ink because, that's how I roll. I want that white border to be completely covered, especially with the vintage photograph ink. The black ink is going to be more on the very edge. Next, we're going to use some of that vintage photograph ink to ink up the bucket, focusing heavily on the edges, just here and there on the rest of the bucket. Right, let's add our images. I'm going to apply the Mod Podge to the back of the image and place it wherever I want. I did place the graphic slightly askew, one a wee bit higher, the next a wee bit lower, all the way around the bucket. Once all the images are placed, I'll fill in the blank space with the text. So I basically just put these wherever they fit. I grabbed my folk art floating medium and some Americana bittersweet chocolate, and we're going to do some shading. I'll prep my brush with the floating medium, then side load by scooping up some of the bittersweet chocolate onto the corner of my brush. I'm going to stroke the brush on my plate, and this will blend the medium with the paint right there on the bristles. Holding the paint corner of my brush where I want my darkest shading, we're going to go right around the edge of the images and the text. This is going to help diffuse and blend the image with the background surface of the bucket so it's not so stark. Know what I mean? I don't want it to look like we just slapped stickers on there. So this project was originally for last week's Last Thing Thrifted collab, but there wasn't enough time to fit it in, so I thought I'd put it in today's video. Anyway, I'm going to finish up here, adding a wee bit more color around the bottom of the bucket, while we're at it. Why not? To give it a wee bit more of a mixed media vibe, and as a final touch, I'll stamp any negative space with the number 31 and the words Happy Halloween in black ink. Once that's done, we're going to seal it with a top coat of mud podge, and you'll get to see it at the very end of the video. For our second project, we're making a sweet wee pumpkin doll. So we're going to need a 1.9 inch foam ball. I got these at the Dollar Tree. My Dollar Tree is no longer carrying foam balls, so not happy about that. I'm also using some Model Magic clay that I colored with Spice Pumpkin acrylic paint. This is left over from a previous project, and I do have videos that show you how to mix the paint with the clay. I'll link them in the description box. I grabbed some fabric scraps from my stash, which I had previously tea stained, so that saved me a step. And we're also going to need some polyfill to stuff this fella. First things first, I'm going to press flat spots on the top and bottom of the foam ball using a jar lid. Just pressing down on the ball, this will flatten both top and bottom, obviously. This of course will be his pumpkin head. So let's condition and roll out some clay to cover the foam ball. So you know the drill, I just knead the clay a little bit, then I'm going to flatten it out with my rolling pin. I lay the clay over top of the ball, pressing it to ensure that it sticks to the foam, and I'm going to cut away some of the excess clay. We'll add that in pieces until it's completely covered. And I'll roll it on the table to smooth it as I go. Now this doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to cover it with more clay in just a moment. To make the ribs of the pumpkin, I'm going to roll out 4 balls of clay, which I'll roll into canes, and then I'm going to use my finger to press the cane flat. I want the cane to be on the wider side, and I'm also going to roll over it with my rolling pin, just a smidge, to make it a wee bit more uniform. Now we're just going to place this onto our ball to create our first rib. And I'll roll over the seams with the handle of my clay tool to incorporate the rib with the clay on the pumpkin. I'm going to repeat this with the other 3 ribs, lining them along, side by side. So there we go. We have 4 wide ribs to our pumpkin. To make his stem, I'm going to grab another wee bit of clay and I'm going to roll it into a cone shape. I'm flattening the bottom just by pressing it on the table. I want the stem to be short and squatty and kind of on the wide side. I think that's cute for this sweet guy. So now we're just going to pop it on top and we're going to incorporate it just like we did the ribs, rolling over the seams just to make sure that it's really well incorporated with the clay beneath it. I'm going to reinforce the sections between the ribs. I'm just running the handle of my tool down there because I lost some of that definition. I'm keeping his features really simple and basic. I'll use a ball tool to press simple circular eyes, and I'm going to use the larger end of the tool to make an oval nose. I'm just going to rock it from side to side a wee bit. There we go. Using the pointy end of my tool, I'll carve a simple smile, and then I'm going to use that ball tool again to flatten that wee area of his mouth. I want that to be, a little concave. And you know what? Let's add some perpendicular lines to mimic his teeth. We can set that aside and let it dry overnight. I made a pattern for his body from cardstock. As you can see, it's a pretty simple shape. I'll fold my fabric in half, right sides together, and I'm going to trace the pattern onto the fabric. I'm just using a regular old pencil for this, nothing special. Now I'm going to pin both sides together. For his arms, I'm winging it by drawing rectangles with one rounded edge. I'm going to do that directly on the fabric. I grabbed my sewing machine and we're going to stitch his bits and bobs together. Place my needle directly on the drawn line and I'll follow it with a straight stitch. If you're not into sewing, you can always use hot glue instead if you prefer. Now I'm going to cut around this stitching, leaving a small seam allowance. I don't want to get too close to the stitch. There's been many a times where, I've accidentally cut into my threads. Now I'm just going to turn this right side out. I'm using my clay tool handle here just to get those points on his feet pushed out. And I'm going to do the same exact thing for the arms. There we go. That looks good. 2 arms, relatively the same size. They'll get attached somewhere around here. But first we're going to stuff them. I'll stuff his pudgy body pretty firmly, using a skewer to get it all the way down into his legs. And the same deal for his arms. This is a nice quick weave project because it uses up a lot of scraps and stash product. You know what I'm saying? I just had these scraps in my fabric collection, so why not use them to make this cutie? I'm using an embroidery needle and some black embroidery floss. I'm going to do a basting stitch around the openings of his body and his arms. This particular fabric, it's a heavy canvas ticking, so using the embroidery floss and the needle really made a big difference, made it so much easier. I'll tie off his arms after cinching them closed, but I'm going to leave the body open until we're ready to add his pumpkin noggin. You feel me? The arms were really quick to do. I think I only did 4 stitches each to close these off. So I'm just going to pull this tight here and give it a double knot. I'm going to use my vintage photograph ink again to add a wee bit more staining to his body. This gives me a little bit more control on, where exactly I want it to be darkest. I'll use the floss again to stitch his arms to the sides of his body. I think this will add to his rustic charm. You feel me? It's just a couple of quick stitches, tie it off, and we're done. We're going to set that aside for the mow so we can work on his fancy collar. I have a couple of strips of fabric here. They're about 18 inches long, give or take. And we're going to fold the harlequin in half lengthwise and pin it together. Then we're going to do a basting stitch just below the folded edge. I threaded my needle with a nice long strand of regular old thread and knotted the end. And a basting stitch is just a simple up and down stitch. Up from the underside, down through the top. You just keep going until you reach the end of your strip. Also, I do cinch the fabric along the thread as I go. It was just easier since it's a nice long strip. Easier to handle that way. I fuss with the gathering just a wee bit before tying it into a loop. So I'm going to give this a double knot. It's basically just like making a fabric medallion or rosette. Right, so I'm going to repeat this on the strip of muslin too. I didn't fold the muslin in half lengthwise because it wasn't quite as wide as the harlequin strip. So I just left it as is. And that made it slightly wider, which is cool because that's going to be the bottom layer of our collar. Our pumpkin has sat overnight, so he's dry and ready for paint. And we're going to start by dry brushing him with a coat of Americana burnt orange. So I'm loading my brush and getting most of the paint off of it by wiping it on my paper towel. And now we're just going to scrub the color all over the pumpkin. By the way, I don't think I mentioned it, but I decided to call him Scraps since, that's what he's made of. I want to tone down that burnt orange with a dry brush coat of terracotta. It's slightly lighter, so it'll take some of that harshness out of the burnt orange. I dipped the end of my ball tool into Ceramco charcoal paint to fill in his eyes and nose. I'm using the same ones that I used to create them. So there we go. Boop. Just dotting it right in there. I'm going to use my number 0 detail brush to fill in his mouth with charcoal as well. I give him tiny wee eyebrows with charcoal, just tiny little slashes. See? His stem will get a dry brushing of Americana bittersweet chocolate. I'm just going to build the color up until I'm happy with it. Okay, so next, I mixed some burnt sienna with my floating medium to make a kind of wash, and I'm going to brush it all over him, getting into the grooves of his features and the ribs. Once I get it on there, I'm going to lightly wipe it back with a paper towel. I'll add a second wash, this time with bittersweet chocolate, repeating the process, building the color until it blows my hair back. You know what I'm saying? I dampened my craft toothbrush and we're going to sprinkle him. You know, I've been on a sprinkle jag lately, so I'm doing this with bittersweet chocolate. Just pulling my thumb across the bristles and letting the sprinkles fly. We're going to do his body too. I made a wee patch for the front of his long johns with some scraps, and I stitched X's onto the patch with floss. Let's add some oyster beige sprinkles too, lighten them up a wee bit. This is also an Americana color. Well, you know, I'll list all my supplies in the description box. Once this is done, he's going to get a top coat of Mod Podge to seal him. I'm using a cosmetic sponge to bounce that coat of Mod Podge on. For me, this is the quickest and easiest way to get it on there. Forgot to tell you, we're going to need a skewer. So I'm going to place that skewer into his body, leaving an inch or so of it sticking out so we can attach his head to it. But first, once we get that in there, we're going to cinch the opening and tie it off nice and tight. I'm going to cut off the excess thread once it's tied. I found these jingle bells in my stash, so I'm going to add these to his hands and his feet. They're on wire, so we're just going to twist them right on. Now for his fancy collar, we're going to pop those on. First, the muslin one, and then the harlequin one on top. Once they're on, we're going to pop his head into place. I did add a wee bit of fabric glue to the inside hole on the bottom of his head that I made with the skewer. This way, his head won't fall off. I'll use a little bit more of that fabric fix glue to attach his patch to the front of his long johns. And guess what? That's it. Scraps ready for Halloween. Let's take a look at our finished projects. Here's our candy bucket made from a bakery cookie container, a wee bit of tissue paper, some vintage prints, a bit of Mod Podge, and a disposable cookie container turns into a treat bucket. This was a quick and fun way to transform something that would have wound up in the bin into a festive trick-or-treat pail. This can double as a cute decor piece, or you can place your Halloween goodies in it. What do you think? Here's Old Scraps, our jaunty primitive pumpkin boy. This wee fella started out as a small foam ball and some fabric scraps, a handful of Model Magic, some paints, and some bits and bobs, and we have this wee cutie. He'll fit in just about anywhere in his sweet long johns and his rusty bells. I think he's adorable. How about you? Let me know what you think. Thanks to my buds, Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling and Shelly of Repurposed My Way for hosting this fun collab. You're going to find links to their channels, as well as the link for the playlist in the description box. You're definitely going to want to check out all the videos and show everyone some love. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.